with AI. They know it's me.
Now recording.
Hi, Craig. I love you.
Yay, Craig.
Welcome back to Freakin' Bots in disguise as Craig.
Okay, so Saturn 2, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, let's do the intro.
Bro,
Welcome, people, to the new set. No,
Let's not let Crispy do the intro.
Crispy's officially banned from intro.
Look at how it's
Takes
written
too
down,
long.
though.
I swear I have a better one.
Yeah, that's better.
That one's definitely making the edit. I can guarantee it.
Right, we're not going to cut that out at all.
Library, welcome to Atrium, our podcast for the Library of the Unknown, to our older sibling, Library of the Untold, owned and conducted by
Joe Phipps.
Proceeding with Text 2. Yeah? Do we want to, any, opening remarks, lingering thoughts, lingering notions, synapse between episodes that we want to sort of preface the episode with?
Well, Saturn actually came to me in my dreams. Yeah.
Like Kronos?
Sure.
Yeah, came to you? Spoke with you?
Yeah. So I now have an entire tome to add to the rhetoric. No, unfortunately, that did not happen.
Personal reveries to reinforce the gnosis occurring at this podcast.
I have a secret reveal.
He's gonna reveal the secrets of the Vatican. Yes.
Talk about the secret of Remfon.
What is it? What was that? Rem? As in,
Remfon. So Remfon star, holds the cube within it, or the cube of Saturn.
okay.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with that.
Can you
I would
spell
like to
out
hear more.
that word? So
Remphan. Remfan.
Remfan. Okay. Yeah, this is new to me as well. All right. If we could maybe introduce this real quick, and we could keep this sort of on the back burner while we proceed. What's Remfan, if you will?
Star of Remfan. Yeah, it's an old Babylonian reference to Saturn.
Okay. All right, we'll keep that in mind. Remfan.
Black cube is the cube of the simulation as well.
Yeah.
I have to re-up my my YouTube subscription. I hope that doesn't interrupt us.
We have all read the line, "In the beginning, the earth was without form and void," leaving the reader with the assumption that Mother Earth was alone with big guns upstairs to casually continue on with creation at a leisurely pace. A scholar of the esoteric might chime in and suggest that this was the beginning of our particular understandable reality, and not necessarily the beginning of all things, of which there is none that a human being would be able to grasp without mythological personification. So let's keep this personification concept in mind, as it is a must to be able to speak or hear about aspects of reality birthed long before our language developed to describe things within the scope of our biological senses at that. So without form and void, we might imagine this as everything everywhere being one thing and absolutely nothing at the same time. If that is difficult, and you're not alone in that boat, imagine the software on your computer called Paint Workshop. Open a fresh tab and notice that it is blank, void. Yet, every single thing that you could possibly create with it already exists right there in the software, laying dormant and unmanifest, waiting for a creative hand to bring its potential to life. Great. But here's the thing. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. It seems as though Mother Earth had company. This should not be a surprise, by the way. Mother Earth was a good thing, and if we create good, this causes its opposite to also be born immediately as well. For example, if we lived in a flat two-dimensional realm and I decided to invent the concept of up, welp, blammo, we immediately also invented the concept of down by default, because as Uncle Alan has told us many times, every front has a back. So we have darkness right in the face of the deep. Mark Booth boldly attempts to describe this happening without personification, writing, "To a human eye, it would have looked as if the gently interweaving mists that had first emanated from the mind of God were suddenly overtaken by a second emanation. There was a violent storm like some rare and spectacular phenomenon, the death of a star perhaps, except that here in the beginning it would have been on a completely overwhelming scale that filled the entire universe." Unquote. If I was to attempt the same, that is describing this happening without personification, I would show you a table of sand that is a perfectly smooth and uniform layer, then introduce a vibration to the table that causes it to separate into individual forms due to the combining of frequencies and, of course, time. Mark's words with my imagery might help the mind a bit, but it still doesn't slap the way it could. Where's the drama? We are a people of mythology, and our aptitude for comprehension tends to thirst for a good story. And so, personification swoops in to lend a hand. Hence, Mother Earth and Father Time. Two titanic forces of unimaginable power are dueling it out. And everything touched by this brawl comes into a temporary form, from pre-existence to separation, just like our hypothetical invention of up gives us down. This darkness upon the face of the deep was a cloaked phantom lurking in the distance and laying chaos on anything that had the balls to emerge into reality. Let's call this cloaked figure, I don't know, Stan. Stan is not necessarily a villain, but this is a reality of duality, and we need a bad guy. Mother Earth would be remembered as soft and loving, but right now she has brass knuckles and a shotgun sawed off at the barrel. If you have ever accidentally come face to face with a baby grizzly bear cub, you'll understand that her passionate aggression is simply a fractal of her loving nature. The Phrygians, for example, saw her as Sybil, a goddess riding a chariot pulled by powerful lions. When needs be, the force of Sybil was so wild that onlookers would be overrun by a savage delirium that caused them to castrate themselves. Now, I've been delirious before, but never felt the urge to twist my own balls off about it, but to each their own. Her opponent, Stan, however, would not be remembered as soft and round. He is remembered as long, bony, and covered in hard scales. His two most prominent features were glowing red eyes and, of course, a long scythe or harvest blade, a blade that was not meant for castration, but instead was aimed for the throat. Well, that's how he was remembered anyway. Foreshadowing. If the mother created life just like our analogy of up, then in due order, death followed swiftly behind. Life and death are now different things that are in fact the same as they have birthed from the same force. But why? Well, formlessness into form occurs at a price. Written on that price tag is time, and Father Time is, of course, the one thing that no thing can survive. If something has a form seemingly separate from the whole, it is now a temporary unit, and time is going to eat it alive. Father Time is going to eat his own children. This personification captures the fact that you are you and not anyone else. You occupy a specific space at a certain time. While you're there, nothing and nobody else can. But They want to, because it's a crowded universe. You may take up that speck of space-time now, but you won't for long. You are limited by the character of limitations himself, Stan, a character that lives between this world and the permanent fixed stars above. A character that patrols the outskirts of our homeland with his long blade of death and harvest, because so long as you are breathing, you live in his world. The Greeks called him Kronos, Hindus call him Shani, Babylonians Shemesh, and so on. But all personified figures seem to have a celestial origin. So, to us, this barrier of the halfway point that marks our biological limitations is called Saturn. And if every myth has a scaled and icy dragon to defeat, it seems that humans would need a savior. That is where the blonde-haired and blue-eyed personification of the sun comes in. And thank God, right? Well, let's hold on right there. All of this is the esoteric version of the myth that stands. But there's a problem. A giant wrench has been thrown into the cogs of this model. If there is anything we have learned from the esoteric, it is that the quandaries seem to duplicate the deeper you go, and eventually everything comes reversed and turned on its head. It turns out that the reason this Saturn mythology stands as such is because of translation errors. Not mistakes, by the way, but changes were made deliberately for a specific reason. Here's the problem. The errors they were correcting were shared by all ancient cultures of all times on a global scale. Mother Earth was remembered as being safe and warm, remembered that way. Is it possible that time has a hand in this remembering? Is it possible that a personification of fear taking up half of the night sky might have once been the reason for the human ability to experience the divine directly? What if, after digging just a little bit deeper, we find that the bad guy, once upon a time, was what the world considered good? If we were to apply
He worked so hard on that intro, y'all.
Holy shit.
Um,
That's an intro.
It's just the intro, yeah,
that's quite an intro.
for
It
sure.
Okay,
makes a
so
lot of
what are our
noise.
thoughts? What are our thoughts on the intro?
Well, I mean, it's definitely interesting. Like, and it basically is it has the feel of a very long story of yin yang type deal, right? Like once was good, now is bad type deal.
Yeah,
Well,
Um,
he's setting it up that way.
and there's a
yeah,
claim here that if I'm tell me if I'm mistaken, right? But Saturn was once the original sun. That we once worshipped it. That it garnered a connection with divine, and now because of where it sits, it's representative of the distance between us now, between us and the divine. Is that right?
Something like that.
I mean, I wouldn't say that sums things up, but that's kind of a notion that I kind of gathered there by the end of it.
I mean, yeah, he's going. So this is the very mythological Saturn Part 2 video concept. And then the one that's coming out tomorrow night is the other side of that, which is the more sciency, but like still creative minded
The concrete side of things,
aspect of it. So for the anniversary promise of a Saturn Part 2, once we hit 100K, he decided it would be really cool to do two videos, one of them more mythology based and one of them more sciencey based. So this is the mythology based one, which actually was the one that was closer to his heart, right? And then the one that comes out tomorrow is the one that
yeah. More
I
aligned
liked
with what
working on the
he's
most
talking
because
about.
It's
the
more
the
sciencey.
actual
Yeah,
planet.
I like. It's just more fun to make, I think. But you'll see.
Yeah. Any other initial notions on the so far presented idea? Sky, crispy.
Just the personification idea.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just let me know. Anybody hail me down to pause whenever you have
I'm good to
thoughts.
keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll go.
Apply a scientific model to the occult understanding of Saturn, we might call Saturn's orbit our celestial skin on some kind of macrocosmic cell. If we are like the mitochondria, the powerhouse or battery of the cell, the orbit of Saturn traces a celestial sphere that would be like the pellucid skin, the outside of which is chaos in both cases, as above. Ancestors of the Egyptian priest kings, the Dogon tribes people, spoke of ships near Saturn in the moon regions that worked as a gateway between our world and another near Sirius B, working as a bridge across that chaos. They could also count Saturn's rings and moons before we could. Peep that video if you want. And it is nice they spoke of these things back then, so we don't have to all the way depend on an embarrassing organization that will color a picture of Nevada orange and say that they drove around on Mars, yet somehow still spending those tax dollars on something. I don't know. Digress. But when we go back further to a time more distant and obscure, we are met with unexpected surprises. We often hear about an ancient golden age for Earth. It was said we had one season, stillness and paradise. We can't prove this, but there are a lot of old ass references to it, one of which we covered in Moon Impossible. The Zulu people speak of the time before the moon, which was the catalyst of our planet's little weeble wobble procession. More recent to us, we have works of literature by Hesiod, Homer, Virgil, Ovid, John Milton, etc., that speak of planetary bodies as figures of deity in a way that refers to our sun as being Saturn in a romantic way. In fact, the way our current sun is described, it seems like it wasn't even a prominent figure in the sky. Whether it be the introduction of the current sun or the moon, something happened way back in the day that caused the Earth to have four seasons and a lot of extra turmoil. The reason being the castration of Saturn and many other myth equivalents that we'll go over if you just hold on a damn second. Yet today, like even in our intro, we refer to Saturn as some kind of hex or curse, even to the point of depicting him as a Grim Reaper type dude who eats his own kiddos. How can we reconcile this mix up? Well, being born today makes you a child of Kronos, and you're in the party. Congratulations, you're gonna die. So, why did Homer and company consider Saturn's rule as a golden age? Mythic lore maintains that Father Time, your boy Saturn, gave birth to delicious children, one of which escaped being eaten. This was Jupiter, or Zeus as myth holds it. And just like any good prince, he was ready and willing to take over that throne. So, as one does, Jupiter had Saturn castrated, like they did to Michael Jackson to ensure that he kept his falsetto voice. Is that part true? Probably not, but we're having fun. Mike was innocent. Time and space gave birth to children that we call planets. And if we are paying attention to natal charts and such, we might even compare them to the hard drive of which the software of our reality is programmed. So reality kind of funnels in through them, like the center of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life diagram shows. Dark things can pour in also. That's why your mom is listed as the center on this one. So, why the mythy mix up anyway? Let's take a look at some ancient literature the way that David Talbot did.
Ancient cultures the world over insisted that an exemplary sun once ruled the sky. For the Egyptians, this former power was the creator Atum Ra, ruling from the center and summit of the sky. In ancient Mesopotamia, we see the primeval sun as a great turning wheel in the heavens, and the astronomers named this body as the planet Saturn. But an archaic Latin name for Saturn was Sol, the sun. In earlier Greek texts, the planet Saturn, called Kronos, was also named Helios, the sun.
Numerous figures of a universal monarch are translated as sun gods. But when translating these, there is quite a bit of assuming going on. We place the sun in that monarch's place because, well, it's obvious that it must be what they were referring to. Here's the problem. The oldest, most ancient religions go out of their way to distinguish that the sun they are speaking of is not the golden star that we are assuming. Among these distinctions, Saturn is impossibly described as the best sun, the primeval sun, and even the great central sun. For example, in ancient Mexico, myth flat out states that in the old world, an exemplary sun ruled the world and was not the current sun that we have today, indicating a very unnerving concept to scholars that ancient people were around to survive an impossible, unexplained happening, unless they didn't have bodies that required surviving. We'll get to that. Calm down. The Incas and the Egyptians on the opposite side of the earth speak of the superior sun as having retired after its reign. So, in response to this impossible dilemma, 19th century linguists began swapping out the references to Saturn as the main sun with ancient names used for our current sun. For example, when they saw the word Kronos as referring to the great central big dog, they would just put Helios in their translations instead, claiming that it must have been what they meant. To this day, those word swaps remain in our literature as such. Side note, I feel it is very important to remember that this happens all the time, and we don't always know about it. The people who translated ancient texts for us took liberties with it, according to what they preferred. A huge problem in itself, but worse if we don't recognize it as a possibility. And these are not always mistranslations, but instead intentional changes that we, the readers, have no control over. But by the time our leading expert, Franz Boll, pointed it out, it was too late. Sun worshippers referring to it as Saturn was vastly widespread and completely covered up. This mistake correction was the translator's error and not what the ancient text meant to say. By then, we were off and running, creating new information birthed through these corrected translations. I'll be referring quite a bit today to David Talbot's book that I couldn't find anywhere online for any outrageous price. So I went ahead and printed this bitch out at Kinko's or whatever. Among the Egyptians, the father of the paradisal age possessed many names, but each tradition proclaimed the same original excellence of creation, subsequently corrupted. The peaceful epoch was distinctly the age of Kronos under a different title. Throughout their history, the Egyptians believed in a time of perfection at the beginning of the world. With the god king Osiris, the Egyptians constantly associated a vanished golden age. As king, Osiris, the beneficent being, taught his subjects to worship the gods, gave them the arts and civilization, and formulated the laws of justice, found founding sacred temples and cities and disseminating wisdom from one land to another. He became the benefactor of the whole world, but his eventual murder brought worldwide destruction. Egyptian sources too often portray him in human form, yet the early religious texts say again and again that Osiris was the supreme light of heaven, ruling from the cosmic center. Native American cultures describe a superior sun responsible for an era of peace and plenty. Assyrians and Babylonians described a sun called Shemesh as standing at a mountain's edge with a big curved notch in his sword, almost like the curve of a bull's horns. And he is turning a great celestial wheel. In multiples of those texts, the name for Saturn was found where the text was clearly meant to indicate the central sun figure. This cannot be stressed enough. These puppies were fortunate enough to squeeze through history without our prior linguists assuming a different meaning, which is good because we can now look at both and see an impossible connection, widespread and on the opposite sides of the world saying the same thing. Archaeologist slash historian George Rawlinson was perplexed by these anomalies, stating, "How is it possible that the dark and distant planet Saturn can answer to the luminary who irradiates the nations like the sun?" Unquote. End quote. A weird side note coming in hot from Egypt. Horus, the bull of the sky, representing kingship and strength, was a personification of Saturn. And within his head, specifically his eyes, were the sun and the moon, as if the life giving sun itself is within the body of Saturn, like our macrocosmic cell analogy at the top of this video. Was the outskirt of the celestial spheres traced out before our sun was created? Well, I am reminded of the aeons turned archons that emerged from Yaldabaoth before he created a great luminous fire. Peep that video. So Osiris has all that going for him, and Min seems to like what he sees. But, like, what's going on here now that we see the prior inversion? That myth has been changed. We will come back to Talbot here in a second, but let's first work with this whole first sun concept.
Amongst the greatest of enigmas was the cosmic wheel recorded by every ancient culture. Images of a wheel in the sky carved on stone are older than civilization itself. Many archaeologists see these wheels as an imagined vehicle of the sun rolling across the sky. But in its most common form, the cosmic wheel doesn't go anywhere. Often it rests on a stationary pillar, or atop a stairway, or ladder, or is turned by a rope while resting on an altar or table.
If we look at the chakra system, we see them listed from 1 to 7. This starts
Thoughts?
That
Yeah.
ladder, Jacob's ladder.
For the
Instead of,
chakras.
yeah, instead of like going to heaven through pearly gates, you climb up through the pillar.
I would say yeah, like in certain in certain aspects of it, like certain interpretations, for sure. I mean, there are people who still believe that it is a literal pathway to metaphysical planes.
Describing the same thing almost, maybe, right?
Yeah,
In different languages. That is to say, not in different terminologies. Uh, to climb a ladder and walk through pearly gates is the same as to go through the necessary sort of sadhana, the devotion that brings you to a state of union that you could call as having an equivalence to reaching heaven. Yeah, just in different terms.
Well, and if heaven is a state of consciousness, then he's correlating a center of consciousness to Saturn in that when Saturn was our original sun, our consciousness was limited to a certain degree, and then now that it's moved out, we have less limitation. Is that what he's saying? Consciousness wise?
Well, I think to Jacob's, I mean, I'm sorry, to Sky's point about Jacob's ladder being the chakra system, right? If you think of
Yeah,
Saturn
he's
as
just
sort
yeah.
of like this clockmaker that's governing the cycles of time. It's governing the cycles by which limitation and transcendence of limitation can oscillate up and down in intensity and docility over time, right?
Right.
The chakra system, if you scale that out to a cosmic model, I mean, and if you keep the sort of ontological mirror of above so below, within so without, then the universe itself and the way the celestial bodies operate are the sort of clockwork that Saturn as a governor has established that are going around in a certain way, that are going in these certain necessary cycles, that we may or may not use to our advantage or to our self-sabotage. That that that's this ladder that we're able to climb up or down, um, depending on our consciousness, right?
Also, like they
Yeah.
say something about the one true sun thing, that you have the sun as the one true sun is Saturn. That's because, if Saturn represents physical reality, then the sun is within physical reality. So we revolve around physical reality, in a sense. We so that's why it's probably called the one true sun. But when you have, sun worship, I think I haven't researched sun worship enough, but yeah.
You know what's new to me is this Atum Ra, Atum. From what I remembered when I was reading into ancient Egyptian mythology growing up, it was Aten Ra, like Atenra. Just a little, not that it's too, although it might be significant, but it was just this little thing I noticed there, and it was spelled as that. It
I
was
thought it
spelled
was
as
ATA.
It was um Ra was a separate god all by itself.
Yeah.
And then there was another god created that kind of had the same job, so they just sort of smushed them together. And then it was Amun, Amun,
yeah.
Amunra.
Yeah, there's
But then
also Amun Horus as well, or Horus Ra.
I'm not 100% sure on that. I would say like potentially that Amun Horus may be the
I,
the
I think,
child or the reincarnation
yeah,
of
there's Horus the Elder and then Horus the Younger.
right. Well, Horus the Elder would also be crap. Who we were just talking about? Who was the person who was cut
Saturn.
up?
Atumrum or Ra?
I don't know. I haven't looked into Egyptian mythology in a while.
Is this similar to like bind rune stuff where concepts are being bound together, where the Egyptian deities are being wielded as what, like, forces by which intentions can be made manifest, brought to fruition, um, and if you sort of fuse them together, you can make use of two, sort of kind of like get the benefit of two for the price of one sort of deal. Uh, is that what we're looking at?
I guess it depends on what the Egyptians like really believed. I mean, like,
Yeah,
you know, even historians and stuff don't really know. Like they
so
can
much on.
speculate about certain belief structures and stuff, yeah,
Yeah,
but like they don't really I don't think they really know the amount of influence necessarily. In those, I mean, obviously there's some evidence, right? Like there's temples, there's like things like that. They had so like they obviously had spirituality in that sense, but whether or not it was used as an outward thing like that, it could be more of an animistic thing.
yeah,
Um, and it could even be a physical thing. I mean, like there is like the Anunnaki type idea where like
yeah.
there were real gods that walked the earth and they were just like fucking peace out.
I think animism has much to do with it. I think at that time there's probably still trace connections of the animistic sort of world in our experiential reality at that time, and this sort of this siphoning around of different uh, concepts or forces is kind of similar to, like, I would say, if at the time there's an open-endedness to things, right? Like they're able to just kind of use these concepts in a mix and match almost sort of way, right? So there's kind of I mean, not discounting the idea of actual physical uh visitation on the part of some kind of celestial visitor, but even still, what am I trying to say here?
Are they like
When at
creating
the
new archetypes through
there's
concept?
yeah, I mean, the animism, I think the reason why it's so, why you could say that it's so deeply rooted and relevant to this is because you see it in like Odinistic culture and other cultures where there's just so much similarity. And I'm not really saying that they're the same exact character, but I think the ideas are being inspired by the same muse and being being expressed by the same human will to creativity, but coming out in different ways depending on uh, the personal experience of those who are expressing it, right? And you know, when you have characters like archetypes like Odin and Loki and Thor, these are just aspects of each other. You wouldn't really individuate them too, although you can. And I think the idea here is that you can individuate, and but then you can sort of derive things back to their sort of source, where you're saying where you can. What's your idea of like a Rolodex, right? Things are just kind of partial to each other in a universal sense. There's an underlying substrate that makes them all sort of like aspects of each other in uniformity, really, right? And you could say Odin represents that uniformity, but even then, that's kind of like an individuation of it, right? And this happens in Egyptian mythology. Is all I'm trying to get at, I guess.
I would say in the animistic approach, they would have much more of a physical contact with things, right? That animism, it doesn't disregard metaphysics or whatever. It like usually the kind of spiritual aspects have a physical manifestation of some sort, a physical influence, right? Like there's like even like when you go into like not necessarily like animals or whatever, but like like this stone or this bridge
Yeah,
or like whatever. It becomes a much more fluid type of thinking rather than being like a very like soul oriented or a object oriented approach. Um, so it depends, on how they really viewed it. I don't know, and I mean, again, the Egyptian uh culture, it spanned like 3,000 years or something crazy. Like that's a long friggin' time. So like things, they could have had one approach at one point and had a different approach at another, right? Or like a different mentality about it,
yeah,
especially after like westernization of like with Greek and like, the Arab invasions and stuff. Like things change.
yeah,
So,
Well, they changed.
uh,
They changed before the Ptolemaic period. Like you could tell the total difference even in storyline between Old Kingdom and New Kingdom, Middle Kingdom too. Like you could definitely tell the difference in just the hieroglyphics, just in the pictures. You know what I mean? Themselves, you can see the change.
right, because their society collapsed and then was rebuilt in those. That's why they're separated, right? Because they have two,
And
three different distinct categories of what these kingdoms were.
hmm,
and the language itself was refined and evolved.
Mhm. True, right? So their language changes too. They, like you said, it gets more complex or it gets more even specialized, right? So
Same thing happened in Norse mythology, in like the runes, right? The runes, the whispers.
mhm,
They they're like the Hebrew alphabet. Every one of them stands for something much greater than a word, right?
right,
Much
it's a
greater than
concept,
it's a whole fucking idea. It's a vibe. Every single one of them is a whole ass vibe.
right?
And now we need several of them just to get out a word. You know what I mean? Like,
Funny you say vibe because I wanted to like sort of state slash inquire something about that because I feel like over time, right? Like the usage of runes in the Odinistic tribes or the usage of these symbols in ancient Egyptian tribes or the Dogon tribes, right? Like I feel like at some point far back enough, if you go, genuine planting of intention is happening with these symbols and probably maybe the use of sound and chants and stuff like that. And that somewhere along the line, the procedure, so to say, the method or the technology, so to say, was forgotten. And we sort of kind of just mimicked what our ancestors did without real purpose or rationale behind it and started using these symbols or continued to use these symbols. Like you said, I mean, whole societies came to be destroyed and reconstructed over time, and you know how much of the original way of life that constituted these people's identity as human beings, not even just culturally, but as their connection to the environment that they lived in. How much of that is lost over those historical events, right? And then the usage of these symbols or the usage of these runes are sort of the sense of it, the sensibility for it is lost over time, and we're using them. We continue to use them, but in an empty, insubstantial way. To the point now
Right.
that
well, and
Yeah,
then
even
we've
too,
today we're confused.
when you use the older signs, when you use the runes and the older, like Elder for Dark symbols, or whatever,
You know,
now the way that we use them is not the same, but using them at all still carries the original intent.
right? I'm
for certain sounds.
saying that as saying it as an intuition, but also asking like if you know, 'cause I don't know, I'm not sure. It's just what it feels
I
like
mean,
to
yeah,
me, you know.
that's how symbols work.
Right. So that's what it
So
feels
Um,
like
like,
because
yeah, it depends
otherwise
on if yeah,
we would have a very deep sense of the purpose and not be asking what it is right now. There's obviously a historical amnesia as to the effect of the usage, the function.
I think Lippin's going back like all the way to the beginning when like so like the idea being that like when you said a word, right, when you said a sound originally when like the concept of language was evolving in in human beings or whatever, or taught or whatever you believe, they carried a concept, right? There was a specific cohesive concept that was with that word, and they would use that word for that specific purpose, essentially. And then as
yeah,
language grew, as these concepts became, more and more, right? These sounds and symbols, right? They became more complex, right? So if you have a sound for food and a sound for wet, right, or whatever, you can make those into one singular thing that's wet food or whatever. Like, and it just evolves naturally from there. But Lipin's right; it loses its initial meaning, right? It loses the concepts over time of what those. I mean, and I don't think anybody knows. Yeah, like it's lost to history at
Precisely
this point because that's
because
like
of
pre.
the compartmentalization to which you speak. I mean, this kind of boxes
We're talking
everything
like
up.
yeah,
And
50
that, I
million
mean,
years
if
ago. Yeah,
our minds make reality, then that's kind of the outcropping of that's the external effect of that. Now we see things in that way, right?
right, right. It's
that's how consciousness
different.
works. It's like as soon as you accept it as a thing, that's all it could ever be.
A set of propositions that come together narrativistically, right? You start telling the story to yourself in your mind enough times until it becomes your truth.
Your truth projected out in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a
Actually, I'm
pretty
gonna
good
go to mute as
pause
well for
intermission
kid
point.
stuff.
Or,
Oh yeah,
sure,
yeah, that's
absolutely.
right. I forgot I proposed that. Yeah, I gotta go and like check the wood stove and stuff. So I'll
Oh
be back.
wait, I have my microphone off. Goddamn, I didn't say anything though. But I
Oh, sorry.
No,
I
you're
wanted to
welcome to
say
put in your 10 cents.
when you're talking about planetary symbols and celestial objects in general have their inherent meaning, which doesn't really rely that much on cultural bias. But what does happen, you lose the the original meaning is lost somehow uh, through the times. I think that's why you have like the sun worship. Yeah, yeah, go on.
Yeah, we can proceed. Or no, actually, I'll wait. We'll wait for Nico right quick. Um, yeah, it was between her talking about vibe that just really set off the the insight real quick there about symbols, but also our usage of them way back, like before anything that we have on account, right? What that could possibly be, and the what's missing as a product of time and the ups and downs, the oscillation of societies constructing and deconstructing due to conflict, right? And when you said, uh, what was it? That there's like a there's an exist like an inherent purpose. Like it's not that we created what's going to be attached to what. It was like it was inherent. It was fed to us, right? Like
Yeah,
it's not
above
that
so below.
we yeah, it's not that we conjure up DMT by putting certain plants together. No, it's a pre-existing potential structure that then comes together by way of if you figure out this puzzle almost that can be put together, this recipe. Um, I'm sorry, ayahuasca. I didn't even say
No,
the
it's
term.
in our bodies though.
Look, I think that's true for consciousness in general. Like consciousness was broken up in lots of pieces, and if you can put the puzzle together, you can have full access.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think precisely because of the effect of
I'd say
compartmentalization, which Spooky was just talking about, where over time it's because language, and I think we spoke about that in the first podcast about the birdie flying on the windowsill. Like as the more these concepts get clothed in language, the more detached we become that it is that we are from its inherent nature, right? And now here we are, sort of needing to reawaken that the perception for that, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about interconnecting everything into a constellation. Because what happens, what you're saying, what happens is that more and more language gets put on to certain symbols, or the symbol gets used for like war, like usually for like political gain. They're using these symbols, the swastika, for example. Just a lot of the time, politics likes to use symbols to gather people around this symbol to be in a group, in a community of the same cause. But then what happens is it strays from the original meaning in the way it basically disintegrates. Like it becomes more disparate once you put it back together into a constellation of ideas. Then you get back to that it's a vibe. The symbol becomes a vibe again. When you see it, you understand it.
Well, that's the
I
thing
mean,
too, is once you give people a cause to get behind, a cause that they all share, a cause specifically that is suppressing or oppressing people in large quantities, that symbol, whatever you connect with that cause, is what that symbol now means, you know?
Mm. And then when you start a Discord server for everybody to get together and talk about it, than everybody who was, you know, busy putting those constellations together that you were talking about, those, you know, deconstructing the etymology behind these words, where there's these secret meanings hidden in the words that are waiting for you to unpack them, the history behind them, how it evolved to be used the way we do now. Amazing people like Callie Spell
Right?
are always,
Kelly
yeah,
spell. That's what I was
presenting
thinking.
those cool little linguistic nuances, right? And that's as a byproduct of what you were just talking about, Crispy, multiplied by, you know, what Spooky was talking about, these this sine wave of societal collapse or societal, you know, deconstruction or destruction due to conflict. But it's all a vicious reciprocity, right? Of our own sort of self-created historical amnesia that is like that up and down swing of human consciousness, and we're in this like,
Evolution, baby.
yeah, we're like in a vicious reawakening stage. I think that's what I feel like.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
I feel that.
If you connect this back to Saturn, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
you find this whole new world, you know, that the hexagon is actually in the same, just a hexagon itself has its inherent meaning. You know, every geometrical construct has its meaning, but uh, you know, the platonic base forms. Um,
Well, so it's six, right? Hex is six, right? So because we're in three dimensions in the physical realm, they say that the double and the trine of three have power over it, right? So the double is limitation, and the trine is liberation, right? Freedom.
Yep.
So that's why they say, your Saturn return, it sort of cuts the binds on your limitations, right? You're less limited after that, consciousness wise, right? So you get 29 years to be a dumbass, and then all of a sudden, your limitations are dropped, and now you don't, you can see more, you can understand more, you have wisdom, you have access to wisdom, right?
Yeah.
yeah, and then all of a sudden you find out the solar system is arranged in the exact same way you would arrange your zodiacal wheel of certain flavors of ideas which you cannot stray from, because you can't really be outside of a circle, outside of that wheel.
I like the way you
You
put
can be
that,
in the
Crispy.
center of it.
Flavors of ideas. I like that.
Yeah, but that's basically what it is. It's like, also, everything is so interconnected. Every qualia is connected to each other. They have the same kind of construction to them. Like, the same logic happens through every type of sense.
Yeah, I mean, you really cut down to the very raw first principles of things quite often, Crispy. I mean, what you said just a few moments ago about geometry having significance, like there's a message in the symbols, and that's absolutely true, because and to also to reinforce that point, what you said before about angles and angels, because when 2 points connect together, that's absolutely significant. The only way 2 points can connect together is by passage of information. And when 2 points do indeed connect together, that is in formation. It's these things are forming in, right? And then when you get a full symbol, you have this complete structure of an information. And yeah, yeah. And to say that angels are messenger beings that deliver information, and that the message is indeed delivered if you have an angle or an angel where, you know, there's more than 2 points. I think something about the trine there being liberation has something to do with this. If you were to extend beyond just the 2 point structure, and then from 3 points and on, you get all of this fractality, I guess.
I mean, by that definition of angel, though, like neurotransmitters are angels.
Right. We're talking about your
Mes
inner
messenger angels, right?
neurobiology. Yeah, that there is definitely a correlation, right? And that's why we see.
Yeah, so heaven is the highest. It's basically the court of angels under heaven. That's the brain. That's interesting.
Buddhists could correlate it to nirvana and Hinduism, from which the Buddhist traditions sort of strip their all of their base ideas from, would call it moksha, right? Um,
Moksha,
and,
liberation,
Yeah,
liberation
a
and
lot of cool
through
insights.
detachment.
the profound thing about geometry is these geometrical forms. The idea you apply to these numbers and these shapes, they're completely like symmetrical to the form itself. It is genuinely a thought form because these points are informing each other.
But you have to have movement, right? Movement is the whole concept behind the 2 points meeting. So you have a point and it's conscious, right? So that it looks around. The fact that it's looking around creates a duality so that it can have something to look relative to,
Yeah.
which is itself, right? So it moves a part of its consciousness outside of itself so that it can have relativity at all. And from
Yeah,
there, it does this over and over and over and over and over. And that's how consciousness creates its reality so that it can have
and
observation at all.
in every point of the shape is implicated. So you have this complete interconnectedness where everything relates to everything else.
Yeah, I think that further
Quantum
reinforces the
entanglement.
point that Nico just made, which is that like any 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 one thing by itself is meaningless. The only meaning is found in connection. It's found in relationship, synapses between things, right?
Right?
I am also back.
Hey,
Hey,
Yup.
I mean, I don't want to say that with certainty. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, there's only meaning in things that hold connection beyond a single thing. But there's is definitely an experiential uh, sensibility in that way, at least for me.
well, like the dots are fun to explore, but
The,
connecting
the,
them
the lines
is
between them are even more exciting. Yeah, that,
right?
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, definitely.
I agree.
Do we have
You want to
Sky
start
coming
trivia and I'll
back?
keep back?
Yeah, or do we have Sky coming back before? That did feel
Yeah,
like an
a
extended
thing that is not
intermission
connected to
slash
anything is
low key tangent upon a tangent. Uh, we'll get tangent back to baseline.
Starts from the bottom and moves up to illustrate the motion of energy taking place through them due to the increase of Kundalini vibes. A viewer of a video like this is well aware that each chakra has a planetary association. This is one of our classic as above, so below examples. The seven chakras in this case being a microcosmic version of the seven celestial spheres, traced out by the orbits of the macrocosmic planets. We are that. The first of which, right there in your seat, is the Muladhara chakra, represented by Saturn. It seems that this controversial figure is the one kicking off your Kundalini. I suppose the phrase light a fire under your ass makes even more sense now. The other celestial bodies we are talking about today have their own spot within your center as well. The current sun, as weird as that is to say now, is your crown chakra. And just like that, we have opposites. Two figures that are the same thing, but separated by way of poles. In this case, one could view it as up and down quite literally. Let's keep this in mind that ancient lore speaks of Saturn as being cast out to the opposite side of the world axis during its defeat. Knowing that ancient people considered their bodily anatomy to be a reflection of the zodiacal figures above, perhaps this gives us a hint as to this mix up of associations. And Indeed, the root chakra acts as a person's infant survival instincts, the first ones developed. Instincts required when spawned into a physical reality, the very reality owned by Saturn himself. This is supposedly why the seventh day, Saturday, is the day of rest. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And there is that number 7 again, reflecting the celestial spheres, our inner spheres, and numerous other things. But mostly noting here that chakras are considered as wheels, especially in Sanskrit. Well, uh, chakra is Sanskrit for wheel. Even the people who attend the Black Cube of Mecca are to walk around it 7 times, counterclockwise, just like the rings of Saturn happens to orbit. And the Black Cube itself, Kaaba, is considered by some as the navel of the world, just like Gobekli Tepe. And I mean, that list goes on. Like everything back then was called the navel of the world. And how many belly buttons can one planet have? The door of the cube is gold, by the way, and this seems to have alchemical connotations. A celestial giant called Zurvan, who is Saturn by name, of Zoroastrian myth, was known as the original seed. This seed, of course, contains the entire material cosmos. One might see this as an original unformed matter, or as the Egyptians would say it, primeval matter, aka prima materia, a clear alchemical term. In alchemical lore, Saturn's associated mineral is lead, and our sun's is associated with gold. In that, we are seeing a set of opposites as well, being that alchemical plates most prominently depict transmutation as lead into gold. So, Saturn in this way can be seen as a seed of the sun. If we compare this to the bottom to top sequence of the chakras, we have a solid connection or 5. Not to mention the fact we don't really know how old the concept of alchemy is. But there is a reason that utopia doesn't work. With utopia, there is no growth. So, in a way, alchemy makes sense as to why Saturn would be considered the source of all things, including the sun, lead into gold. But that doesn't even come close to explaining the plethora of ancient myths we have that describe Saturn as a gargantuan cosmic monster that ruled the heavens and the earth. Not even close, because this Saturn stuff comes up in Gnostic lore as well. Brought to you.
Anybody have anything to say about the chakras? Saturn's chakra is the Muladhara chakra, root chakra, and it's about survival, primal instincts and such. But it's at the very bottom. It's the very negative end of the spectrum. So the farthest from the sun you can possibly get.
And is negative like meaning like
No.
bad, or is negative like we're talking just negate in the function of negating, uh, like
Negative
Yeah.
as in like as an electrical charge.
right, just being the
Yeah.
opposite.
So it's more like a
Like
yeah, the opposite
like
polar. Yeah.
magnetic, right? So then the bottom of the pole would be magnetic, the top of the pole would be electric. Masculine, feminine.
And negation is what keeps stuff, is what solidifies stuff. Like if it was too positive, it would all explode, but if it was too negative, it would implode.
Ooh, I like what you're saying. This kind of answers that what you guys were talking about in the Discord server earlier. You and Spooky, and he brought up that point about like we're not looking at like we're not asking about like what constitutes the negative or what does the negative space in the overlap of these structures constitute, right?
Yeah. That makes sense.
Potential. Negative
Yeah.
always constitutes
Potential,
Also,
potential.
right? Yeah.
also, um, the more we enlarge our ego, like the smaller we become, right? You know, through the ages, we first we were the world itself, and like we've become smaller and smaller. Just that were some point in our head.
Yeah. I like this how you say we wore the world. We wore the whole world on us in an animistic sense. Yeah.
Well, I didn't say that, but I misspoke. But yeah,
Oh,
it
oh,
still holds true.
yeah. I would say it counts because this clothing our cognition with language, right? I mean, if you remove that, it was clothed in something else. It was clothed in nature, right? Because I doubt we were without an animating principle. This aimless thing. I mean, you could say that the very earliest sort of cognitive expression of humans en masse. This we're going into such like first principle stuff here, like getting all the way down to the bare bone of it. What's the earliest? How do you describe the earliest cognitive expression of like man before anything? I mean, it's the way you, Crispy, were describing evolution as appearing to have consciousness, but almost it doesn't really like it doesn't have. Well, it is, but it doesn't have like an individuated agency, agentialness, right? Like it's, and I would say humans in the most earliest hive mind state kind of operate in this way, kind of like the way that nature at large operates in full mirror effect, right? But now, as that has sort of, gotten smaller and smaller, like you said, the mirror no longer reflects the totality of nature, which it once was clothed in. And now, it like what was the phrase you used, Nico, before? Like a star of a star, and it loses its resolution. Like it's not the original. It's a copy of a copy, and then that's how it happens.
Right?
And so you'd almost say that this grandfather simulation theory of worlds packed within worlds is almost a true, it's a quintessential truth of the way human cognition works.
I think that before we needed spoken language, there was more telepathic communication.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
It's part of
Hence Blavatsky.
well, that would be the
I
core
mean, if you know, you
hive
know.
mind, be the core of the hive mind effect.
Uh,
Well, that's how they say they communicate in the spirit realms anyway, right? You want to communicate in the spirit realms if you're astral traveling or whatever. What you do to communicate with other creatures there is that you have a thought, and that thought takes form, and you sort of send a projection of that form out of you, and they send one
Yeah,
back, and you can manipulate the forms that they create, and they can manipulate the forms that you create, and that's how you kind of communicate, and which is thought forms.
and the whole reason why we're talking about Egypt and their religion, well, how they developed that religion, is because they had that interface to interact in the world in a way where the things outside of them were alive and them, like a genuine reflection. Because what I think how our animistic mind worked, like what there was nothing that told us that we were apart from the world. There was nothing that said that. So we had that tool already to look at the world in that way. That's why we have any any of this esotericism now.
Somebody came
Also,
along and
uh,
decided to
yeah,
religize us.
Potentially.
and telepathic communication. What I heard about ayahuasca when people experience that, it's more like you can kind of more read the intention behind what someone is doing, and you have a level of
Intuition.
Yeah,
no,
that
not
sounds about right.
intuition, no,
Oh,
a cognition. You just look at their face, you look at how their their face muscles move, and you can read the intention behind those movements. Really crazy.
So yeah, I
You
think that's how communications were prior to this recent go at it.
this recent go
Yeah,
at
but
it.
telepathic communication, it's not something very, it's not achievable to just read someone's mind. That's not it. That you don't do that. You because a part of our thoughts are a closed system because we shield uh, this with ego and of course, uh, most thoughts, most activities, in the body, not too much in the aura. That's why it's a subtle field.
If I had to speculate on this, which is
You
mostly
know,
a speculation, I would say
yeah.
that some psychic connection between two or more
Yo,
minds would. Yep. Yep.
hello.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah, we hear you. Yo,
I
what?
was waiting for Lippin.
Oh, oh, yeah, you kind of cut off there, Lippin.
What happened to my mic?
Uh-oh, I think he had a technical difficulty, or has.
Am I here again?
The
What
So
happened?
yeah, reading the intention behind someone, that's a very important part of what I said, because you see, most of what's telepathic in our day-to-day lives is when when we see a person and they just got something about them and we don't know what it is. Now that's you reading their kind of their intentions beforehand through aura communication.
Hmm.
Am I back?
But we can only read the intention. We can't just pick up a thought from somebody. That's because the thoughts of someone that's closed off. You don't you can't really go in a
Well,
sense.
that's more what telepathy is anyway, reading the intention and not the words.
Yeah, there
Because
doesn't really need to
intention
be
is
words. Yeah.
Am I back?
right, is like you don't want there's no necessary words once you know the intention. And that's kind of what clairvoyance is anyway. It's like being able to tell someone's on drugs just by looking at them. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's not like you see
Or
colors around them or you see like, potential ghosts or whatever. You just like tell, like you can
You can
see
tell.
through the
Yeah.
bullshit. You can tell. Like that's what you
Yeah.
could tell. As your conscious awareness opens up, that happens more
Hey.
with more things, with different frequencies.
detail. Yeah, you get more detail, and you get you can uh, do this intention telepathy on the phone. You
Yeah, likely
you can just
because it has no spatial necessities. It's gonna
you know
stay that way. Like it's gonna, it doesn't matter. Distance will never make a difference, more or less.
You guys still not picking up on me?
Oh, we can hear you now.
you're back.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, there you are. I hear you.
We just heard that last thing. Yeah.
Wait. Yeah, I didn't want to have to leave and come back and interrupt Craig.
It didn't seem to bother the bot at all.
Okay. I thought he had a problem with people coming and going. It sounds like he tends to act up with that, but maybe I was wrong.
It might be if you leave and then come because it has to register a name in its log file, and it's
Yeah.
just like your username.
Okay.
So it might have trouble that way, like if people keep coming in and out. But I think like once is not a big deal.
Yeah, I might have been personifying him a little bit too much.
Well, I mean, yeah,
uh,
I get where you're going. It's not a big deal.
but when it comes to the psychic connection idea, to speculate on it, which that's all I can do, I'd have to just assume or presume at least that there's like a base level of you that that if reachable is a consistent sort of substrate that can be identified and unpacked for what it is, and you would say like it's like what's the current most resonant geometric structure that's you know that's emanating from you. I should have turned that off. I'm sorry. Like what structure within you are you kind of like that you're at right now? What are you vibing? What's your current general overall vibe? And I think that at most is what we can contrive of each other psychically, and then the little details in between are contrived or inferred by intuition. Um, like Crispy was saying, like it's a subtle thing. Because mostly it's just subtlety, not directness. It's not a direct message as much as it's like tapping into a sensation that can be vaguely described,
Yeah.
right?
You can't tap into the root because that's, behind the shield that's in the ego sphere. Yeah, yeah, because the farther away that information is from its source, that's not very, that doesn't matter.
Are you saying that the more egoic a person is, the less accessible they are psychically to you? Is that what you're saying? In a sense?
No,
Because if it serves as like a shield to which the truth of somebody's internal world is now vastly distant from someone's reach.
it's just the root of thing. How would I say it? It can only be a shield, um, internally, internally, from your perspective, your ego is a shield.
Sure. I don't mean to put you on blast for precision of terminology, getting our definitions or
No, but
wordplay or anything
I
like that.
mean, I do
Well,
want
we
want it
should,
to be precise because
yeah, which is an admirable quality. But let's help each other like tie this back to what does this hive mind stuff mostly tie back to when it comes to this Saturn mythology. I think it's mostly a seat for like it's a vehicle for which to sit in the eyes of ancient man, right? And because if you can't be open to the idea that people were like living in a connected state, you can't really. It's the sandbox upon which most of these ideas can be explored. Really, it's not just in support of Sheldrake's theory of morphogenesis, but it just is a great root explanation. Even if you were to take anything that feels wishy washy out of the equation and say that human beings are universally the same at their base consciousness, why wouldn't primal archetypal um, drives in our internal world express themselves the same way fundamentally across cultures, across time, dependent of contact? Of course they would. And so now let's get to the bottom of that. What all that can mean, even if it means looking at Dawkins' evolutionary theory and what the implications of the meme and what that has to do with it all, relative to Jung's archetypes, the world of archetypes, and the world of the collective unconscious. Um, it all comes together on this Saturn mythology, doesn't it? I feel
yeah.
like that's a great tie back to get the video back on. What do you guys say?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or if
Also, when we
anyone
look
has
at
any last,
one more
if
thing,
anyone has any
one more
last
thing.
final things, notions to say for a
Yes.
real brief, quick injection. Go ahead, Crispy.
If you look at the picture you see here, is negative space. So this the face is formed by negative space.
Yep.
Uh, Yeah,
The
yeah,
negative
and
space
that
in between,
because Saturn.
and that's constituted from the nucleus between positive and negative poles. You have the all black up there on the top above. Ironically, right, with the what would seemingly be day on the bottom there underneath. It's interesting.
Yup.
Cool.
Okay, let's go with the video, yo.
Hi, Captain.
There is a reason that
I
utopia
could be a.
doesn't work. With utopia, there is no growth. So, in a way, alchemy makes sense as to why Saturn would be considered the source of all things, including the sun, led into gold. But that doesn't even come close to explaining the plethora of ancient myths we have that describe Saturn as a gargantuan cosmic monster that ruled the heavens and the earth. Not even close, because this Saturn stuff comes up in Gnostic lore as well, brought to you courtesy of Jung himself, who wrote, Saturn is a synonym for Adam and the prima materia. The planet is the philosophical or original man. As covered in our last video, Glitch in the Halo, this Adam is not to be confused with the earthly man of flesh and blood, but the Anthropos, the pre-existent man of the cosmos. This again ties Saturn to a title of a god, but specifically of the biological world of humans. Sound familiar? Well, the Kabbalah also shares this notion with the Gnostics. But what about this whole best son thing? It was said that we ended up with 4 seasons in the place of one constantly pleasant one. This sounds literal. There is just no mythos or alchemical allegory to be found that would explain this. Talbot has the leading book, and I think just about only book on this theory, which explains why it's so difficult to get a hold of. But in it, he says the lost epoch of peace and plenty was the original age of Saturn. Ancient myths and rites present Saturn as the god one, the first king, and the all-encompassing heaven man. End quote. It was said that Saturn lived on Earth among men. As Ovid writes, old Saturn fell to death's dark country. Dionysius of Halicarnassus wrote, Kronos ruled on this very Earth. An Orphic fragment states, Saturn dwelt openly on Earth and among men. This notion is shared by many ancient texts, hinting at something along the lines of Saturn being extremely close to people and then ascended back up into the heavens in a violent upheaval. Even if we are to assume that the myths are flat out wrong, we are still left with a huge question as to how and why these became the myths in the first place. So let's pay a bit more attention to what Talbot has to say.
Mr. Emanuel Velikovsky lit a fire for me. A distinguished scholar, colleague of Albert Einstein, Velikovsky had claimed that planets formerly moved on unstable courses, and more than once a planet came close enough to Earth to cause global catastrophe. Most astronomers dismissed the book out of hand, and some threatened a boycott of the publisher Macmillan, forcing the company to drop the book when it was the #1 bestseller. But when the space age arrived, our probes of planets and moons revealed devastated surfaces, inspiring renewed interest in Velikovsky's claims.
The myths of an ancient golden age are too much to be ignored. Something was different once upon a time. In fact, there are multiple separate ancient belief systems that claim we are living in the fourth world. That's an amazingly specific number of worlds birthing and ending. Mythology remembers things that science cannot necessarily just carbon date. Let's also keep in mind that gigantic ice sheets miles tall moved across the land surface like a cheese grater. Anything that couldn't grow back was pulverized and buried. And Rumor has it, if an out of place artifact of any significant size is found, the Smithsonian is hired to swoop in and, playing the good guys, they rebury their findings, this time in their own basement. So we are left with mythology. In Iran, Yima is the lord of mankind and the physical world. The age he ruled knew neither cold nor heat, bringing us back to the one season thing. But when Yima fell from the path of justice, glory was lost on his kingdom, a case of paradise lost, and the world fell into a long, devastating winter. Could this be referring to the beginning of the Ice Age? Because to be clear, we're not talking about the Younger Dryas catastrophe in any of these stories, I think, but instead something much older. It's kind of hard to tell. But many worlds have come and gone due to fire, flood, and everything else, just as the ancient Egyptian priest kings told Solon. The Younger Dryas is most likely just the latest of these global resets. We are attempting to look at something truly ancient and lost to history. In Peru, the Inca have a temple dedicated to the creator god or authentic sun, who was known to be superior to the sun of today because he was able to rest and light the world from one spot. Let's keep this rest and single spot thing in mind for a moment while considering that the door to enter this temple was built on the north end. Because before we can get back into that, we have to get weirder. A considerable amount of evidence shows that very ancient peoples considered daytime to be happening when modern man considers it night, specifically after the solar orb went away to ancient American natives. This is widely acknowledged even to mainstream scholars, specifically as a tune also sung by the Babylonians. Again, opposite side of the world or globe, if I enjoy getting yelled at in the comments, there was something ominously shining in the sky. Many cultures called this the shining. But, I mean, what the heck, right? What was bringing light to the night long before even these ancients were talking about it? Well, a surprising answer comes from Sumerian tablets. Talbot talks about it. Sumerian texts identify Saturn as god of the dawn. Saturn came forth in an overwhelming splendor. In the land, it became day. This does not equate Saturn with the solar orb on the horizon. It means that the coming forth of Saturn inaugurated the archaic day, which began at sunset. So long as the solar orb was visible, the fiery globe of Saturn remained subdued, unable to compete with the sheer light of the former body. But once the solar orb sank beneath the horizon, Saturn and its circle of secondary lights acquired a terrifying radiance. Therefore, Saturn was the great god of the day and not the night sun as scholars usually propose. At a very early period, however, the difference between the day sky and the night sky was forgotten. Under normal circumstances, would one likely forget this distinction? If there is confusion, it is because radically different celestial orders separate the present age from the former. Only in a later age did Saturn come to be confused with the solar orb. There is, in fact, a decisive difference between the primeval god and the body we call the sun today. Unlike
Here's my thing, right? So in the Kabbalah and ancient Jewish even in the Bible, they start the day at sun and not sunrise.
Mm,
Anybody knew that already?
no.
So if you celebrate Jewish holidays at all, even today, even as corrupted as the Jewish holidays are today from where they originally began, they still begin at sundown. That's the start of the day.
Huh.
Hmm,
And
interesting.
like Joey was saying that Saturn was mentioned historically to be the son of the night. But even if that was the case, it would still have been the son they were concerning because that's when they started their day.
I mean, this is new to me. My exposure to Judaism and Islam are very, minimum, less than minimum. Probably more so even for Islam than for Judaism.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the thing. I just thought that was interesting.
No, that's definitely an intriguing.
It is.
Thing of the video now, if you like. Now that I've said my piece.
I mean, Crispy, anything? Oh, uncharacteristically silent for this
He's on mute.
sector of the pause. Okay, we'll proceed.
The rising and setting solar orb, the original sun god, never moved. Unlike this Kiki cat who has a lot of movement and is messing up my program. Okay? You. I love you. You're so special to me. Where are you going? You and me just carry on here? Do you want to host the show? Here, read this part. What's it say? Nailed it. The home of the Great Father is the cosmic center, or navel of heaven. As the Earth rotates on its axis, the northern stars wheel around a fixed point and never fall below the horizon. All of the ancient world looked upon the polar center as the middle place or resting place or steadfast region occupied by the universal monarch. Written in Paradise Found, 1885, the religions of all ancient nations associate the abode of the supreme God with the North Pole, the center of heaven, or with the celestial space immediately surrounding it. Yet no writer on comparative theology has ever brought out the facts which establish this assertion. End quote. In the following years, a number of scholars, each focusing on a different body of evidence, reached the same conclusion. A general survey of ancient language, symbolism, and mythology insists that mankind's oldest religion centered on a god of the celestial pole. Saturn ruled from the summit of the world axis. This information is almost disturbing to contemplate. It seems utterly impossible to have even ever been written about in the first place. This is certainly not reading like an allegory. So how do we reconcile this kind of talk? The way they are describing this as if Saturn was not only extremely close to the Earth, but was also stationary in the sky. And they spoke about it like it was normal. This concept indicates that many ancient glyphs and symbols were inspired by this impossible proximity, and possibly even further reinforcing this idea like a damn loop of ancient evidence that Saturn was in the polar north, at the center of the world axis, because Saturn is on the move nowadays and far away. And this is clearly why those old translators couldn't believe what they are reading and went ahead and changed it for us. I suppose thinking they were doing us a favor. I am reminded of a book seemingly unrelated to this subject, Cygnus Mystery. Andrew Collins reported having a difficult time figuring out what celestial body was in the north prior to Göbekli Tepe, as something was revered as shining in that spot according to the glyphs that are in that very location. Collins came to propose that it was Cygnus, as that would have been the closest at the time. But certainly the software being used to turn back the zodiacal clock would have never proposed that Saturn would have been in a non-moving northern spot in the sky. This is the kind of information that haunts me, by the way, because it kind of forces me to speculate an unnatural occurrence. Did something absolutely gigantic and powerful move the planets around long before our recorded memory? Like one of those universe simulator games, the universe sandbox or something. Imagine if we are within one of those software programs, because either that or is our modern ability to reverse engineer time by cosmic observation completely whack?
Yeah.
Or rather, when I was in eighth grade, like I think seventh or eighth grade, I remember like seeing the teacher showed us this video on like one of those roll-in TV things. Spoopy, Nico, you guys know what I'm talking about. And it was this animation that illustrated this some kind of an event that is acknowledged by like mainstream, uh, you know, science, astronomy, astrophysics, as having been this event that did indeed like kind of rearrange our an early version of our solar system that was drastically different from what it is now into what it is now. And I remember the name of this astral body that they referred to as the culprit of this event. They called as Morpheus or Orpheus. I forget which one. It could have been Orpheus, like the god of dreams. Oh no, that's Morpheus. I'm sorry. Morpheus about dreams. Yeah.
Orpheus was Orpheus. I'm sorry, Orpheus was the singer, the poet, the god of ballads and poetry, and he was like the Bacchus, right? So he was drinking and wine, debauchery, love, poetry, that kind
Well, okay. Well, which culture is this historically?
of. Orpheus,
Uh,
Greek.
right. Okay. Yeah.
It's,
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not
Orpheus was
sure
the first
where
headless horseman, right? No worries.
they're. No, I'm recalling on this video in this animation. It was the name that they used that they invoked. That astro like modern scientists invoked as a just as a given name to this unknown astro um, celestial body, probably something of an asteroidal type that crashed into some of the bodies in our early solar system to create it into what it is now. And I mean, that isn't that a
I
confirmation?
say the asteroid belt.
Well, I think that's an existing mainstream confirmation of what Joey was just asking there, right?
No, but the asteroid. What?
No, we lost speaking.
So everything was an asteroid belt before it all formed together, and it can be
Mm.
symbolic of everything that happens formatively, causatively.
Yeah, awkward silence. Yeah, we'll just cure that right quick.
Now, to add to this haunting idea, the ancient Chinese astronomers called the celestial pole the pivot and referred to the genie of the pivot as being specifically Saturn. But wait, there's more. The Iranian Kivan, or the planet Saturn, was said to once occupy the polar center, and the hits keep pouring in. This video will not be long enough to list all of the ancient references to a Saturnian equivalent as having a home in a stationary northern central position. I suggest that you get the book yourself if you can track it down. But in each case, they talk about it casually, like it was obvious. Meanwhile, we find it, we read it, and dismiss it as a Koski has suggested that many thousands of years ago, but still within human memory,
way the zodiacal framework is expressed often is just without, based on the person who's articulating it, is often absent of an ontological, more organic process to it. That
the gas giants themselves. That makes sense, because if they were very bright and hot at that time, how how would they cool off? They could only cool off if some material went out of the exploded out of the gas giant. Or I think maybe over time material might have leaked out of the gas giant. That could also be a possibility. There's a lot of possible things that could have happened,
Yeah,
and I
but we
just
did.
don't think to to rewind the clock that far back is going to be very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna be a challenging investigation from here on. That's for sure. He's diving into very deep waters, and I think we sort of interrupted him here with the. He's relating it to other existing mythologies that seem to maybe rhyme with this story. So let's see what he has to say. The rest of what he might have to say about it.
Not doing justice for the North American Indian mother goddess. He wrote this book before we found out, I guess, that the natives were not Indians that we knew all along that they weren't. A little forgiveness will be necessary when reading this unit. Owehe conceived twins who battled while yet in the womb. There can be little doubt that the Chinese yin and yang, primordial forces of light and darkness, bore a close relationship to this general tradition of cosmic twins. And the whole womb thing even kind of takes us back to that cosmic cell of living within a like a almost closed system of plasma, like like our sun is a binary star system. We even covered that. Robert Temple calls it the Anubis cell. And in a prior video, we I think talked about how our entire solar system might just be an atom inside of the nutsack of a guy who works at Quiznos. Forgot which video that was. But is this what Sitchin was saying happened with Nibiru? Same story, different names. We see it all the time. But my attention is captured by the parallels where we have the fall in religious texts, especially concerning Saturn as the introduction of time and physicality. It's almost as if the solar system was less gross matter when it was denser together. So, do you guys remember when we chatted with Ashananda and she explained that the peaks and dips of the Yuga cycle as coinciding with the elliptical of closeness and distance between this system and the black hole at the center of our galaxy? She said, the closer we are to it, the higher the yuga concerning human consciousness. I mean, take it or leave it, but she was a direct student of Yogananda, so I didn't argue with her. And the dates of the yugas seem to match the processions. We also hypothesized in Thoth of Agartha that reality as we know it seems to break down the closer we get to the center of things, comparing the Earth's surface to the skull, and the fabled Agartha to the inner brain leading into the pineal gland. Center equals weird in this formula, less tangible and more dreamlike. The same concept is kinda proven with black holes. The density and gravitation takes reality off of its hinges. The laws of physics are out the window. Is this a gateway to the so called other side? Oh, we don't know what gravitation is, like at all. Gravity is still a theory. So, could it be that the quantifiable density and mass of things in reality have a direct relationship with the physical versus spiritual tangibility of it? Is this the fall? Is this why the Promethean figures tend to show up in mythology and warn people of their god's wrath while simultaneously giving them gifts, aka trying to reconnect them with their divine roots? We are the same species as the children of these ancient people of a higher yuga that lived during a time of a higher density of solar system. Is this why human beings still contain the divine spark all these thousands of years later? Is that how the Numic Anthropos became the Hylic Anthropos? Is this why I am losing about half of my new audience who haven't seen the prior 3 episodes? Well, if I might venture out and really risk losing some of you here, does this even help us explain the nature of quantum physics being so abstract and alien to us? Because if a change occurred that was macrocosmic to us, it would deeply affect our reality. But its range of effect might dissipate as it crosses furthering microcosms, like ripples dissipate in a pond and have not yet caught up to our microcosm, the subatomic world. I don't know. But we are certainly digging around in the realm of speculation at this point. Considering these items are so ancient they can't be measured and weighed, all we have is the ancient myths passed down and well, hallucinogens. That's where we get a curveball. This unhinged theory is just that. To anyone who has not experienced a properly gauged and specifically temperatured session with, oh, hanging in the DM of Terrence McKenna, if you know what I'm saying. DM of Terrence McKenna. That works. I don't know. I think I'm clever. Or even a trip to Peru to drink some ancient brew. When the so called deities and Promethean figures left Earth, they said to have left open a gateway to communication with them. To the Brazilian ancestors, that gateway is two plants boiled together. I mean, that is literally how they say they got the recipe for ayahuasca. And they say it puts us in touch with the ancient ancestors. If you ask the Amazonians how they knew that these two plants, out of the hundreds of thousands available in the jungle, created this gateway, they will tell you that they were visited by the daughter of the sun, who came on a boat with no oars after a great catastrophe. Is she the daughter of the first son? Is this catastrophe drastic change in anatomy? You might have heard of the so called chromosome number 2, that the notion put forth in our intro, and thus it reverses everything.
Taking this so literally, right?
Allegorical.
Yeah, and then to take us on all this for an hour, and then for all of your being
Just to be
convinced
like,
of it,
just kidding.
yeah, turning around and say this is not what this is all saying. It's actually saying.
It says whatever the interpreter just.
Yeah, ellipses, dot, dot, dot. What do you, sir, or lady?
Maybe it's the voice of Saturn.
Mm.
We'll lose all three by trying to hold on to what is already gone. Thinking and acting, that is to say, passing the torch onto the next generation to take over.